Theodore Roosevelt wins the 1912 election with a bullet lodged in his chest and blood soaking through his shirt. On the evening of October 14th in Milwaukee, a deranged saloon-keeper named John Schrank fires a .38 caliber revolver at point-blank range. The bullet passes through Roosevelt's folded 50-page speech and his steel eyeglass case before lodging between his ribs. Any other man would have collapsed. Roosevelt steps onto the stage and delivers 84 minutes of oratory, opening his coat to show the bloodstains spreading across his white shirt. "It takes more than that to kill a bull moose," he tells the stunned crowd. The nation watches in disbelief as newspapers carry the image of the wounded warrior refusing to fall. What follows defies every political calculation. Sympathy votes flood toward the progressive candidate. Republicans who had reluctantly backed Taft, the man Roosevelt himself had endorsed 4 years earlier, begin reconsidering. The three-way race tightens in ways no pollster predicted. In this alternate timeline exploration, we examine what could have happened and why the real history unfolded differently. On election night, Roosevelt secures 289 electoral votes. Wilson carries the solid South but cannot break through elsewhere. Taft finishes a distant third, his presidency repudiated by the very party he led. The bull moose has charged through the political wilderness and emerged victorious. But the forces that brought Roosevelt back to power and the enemies he made along the way would soon collide with a world careening toward catastrophe. The inauguration, on March 4, 1913, feels less like a ceremony and more like a mobilization. Roosevelt wastes no time. Within his first week, he reinstates Gifford Pinchot as chief forester, the conservation champion Taft had fired in the controversy that first shattered their friendship. The message reverberates through Washington. The square deal has returned, and scores will be settled. The Justice Department receives new orders. Antitrust cases that had languished under Taft's cautious attorneys roar back to life. Roosevelt proposes something more ambitious, a federal trade commission with genuine enforcement authority, not merely advisory powers, but the ability to investigate, subpoena, and prosecute. J.P. Morgan, the titan who had once sat across from Roosevelt negotiating the end of the 1902 coal strike, watches with mounting alarm. The president they thought they understood has returned with sharper teeth. Yet Roosevelt's progressivism contains contradictions he never fully resolves. He champions the working man while harboring the racial assumptions of his era. He attacks concentrated wealth while dining with the very industrialists he prosecutes. He speaks of democracy while believing deeply in the superiority of certain peoples over others. The Bull Moose Coalition, farmers and factory workers, reformers and imperialists, holds together through force of personality alone. What no one realizes yet is how fragile that coalition truly is. The telegram from Colorado arrives on April 20, 1914, and Roosevelt's face darkens as he reads it. National Guard troops and company guards have opened fire on a tent colony of striking miners and their families at Ludlow. At least 19 are dead, including 11 children suffocated in a pit beneath a burning tent. The Colorado Fuel and Iron Company, controlled by John D. Rockefeller, Jr., has turned a labor dispute into a massacre. Roosevelt's response breaks every precedent. He summons Rockefeller to the White House, not for consultation, but for confrontation. The meeting lasts 4 hours. When Rockefeller emerges, he agrees to binding federal arbitration. The details remain private, but those who knew Roosevelt understand what transpired. The president had deployed his most formidable weapon, the force of his moral certainty, against a man whose family name had become synonymous with unchecked power. The Industrial Relations Act passes Congress that autumn. Federal mediation boards gain authority to intervene in disputes affecting interstate commerce. Samuel Gompers, the pragmatic leader of the American Federation of Labor, finds himself invited to White House dinners, a recognition of organized labor unthinkable under previous administrations. The act falls short of what radicals demanded and goes further than conservatives could stomach. It is, in other words, pure Roosevelt. But across the Atlantic, events are unfolding that will dwarf any domestic achievement. And Roosevelt, for all his foresight, cannot yet see what's coming. The heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne dies in Sarajevo on June 28, 1914, and within weeks Europe tears itself apart. Roosevelt watches the cascade of declarations with grim recognition. He had always believed that war between the great powers was not only possible, but inevitable. Now, as Germany invades Belgium and France mobilizes, he faces the question that will define his second presidency. What is America's role when civilization itself hangs in the balance? He declares neutrality, as any president must, but his neutrality carries an asterisk visible to anyone paying attention. Within months, he submits the National Defense Act of 1915 to Congress, a full year before such legislation passed in our timeline. The regular army will double to nearly 200,000 men. A Federal Reserve Force will train civilians for potential mobilization. Leonard Wood, Roosevelt's old comrade from the Rough Riders, oversees a preparedness campaign that treats pacifism as naivete and isolation as cowardice. Critics accuse Roosevelt of warmongering. He responds that speaking softly requires first acquiring the big stick. The nation remains divided, but the machinery of military expansion grinds forward regardless. Roosevelt is building something, though for what purpose he does not yet publicly say. The answer would become devastatingly clear soon enough. On May 7, 1915, a German submarine sends the Lusitania to the bottom of the Irish Sea. Among the 1,198 dead are 128 Americans. The nation erupts in fury. Roosevelt, who had been preparing for exactly this moment, delivers an ultimatum to Berlin within 72 hours. Germany will cease unrestricted submarine warfare against passenger vessels or face consequences the president leaves deliberately unspecified. His critics call it reckless brinkmanship. His supporters call it leadership. Germany blinks. The Kaiser's government issues the Arabic pledge, promising to warn passenger ships before attack. Roosevelt claims vindication, his approval ratings soaring. "We spoke softly," he tells reporters, "but they saw the stick." Yet the victory is incomplete, and Roosevelt knows it. Germany has not abandoned submarine warfare, merely paused it. The U-boats remain in their pens, waiting. The American Expeditionary Force exists only on paper, and in Berlin, military planners are already calculating how long they can afford to accommodate American sensibilities before the mathematics of total war force, their hand. The 1916 election approaches, and Roosevelt must convince a divided nation that preparation for war is not the same as seeking it. "He kept us ready." The campaign's slogan adorns banners from coast to coast as Roosevelt seeks his third term. His opponent, Speaker Champ Clark of Missouri, campaigns on keeping America out of European quarrels. The Democratic platform warns against militarism and entangling alliances. It is a message that resonates with farmers in the heartland and immigrants from the very nations now slaughtering each other's sons. Roosevelt counters with something more visceral, fear wrapped in patriotism. He speaks of German submarines prowling American waters, of a Europe dominated by Prussian autocracy, of the price nations pay for weakness. He does not promise war, but he does not promise peace either. He promises only that America will be ready for whatever comes. The election proves closer than 1912. Clark carries much of the South and makes inroads in the Midwest, but Roosevelt holds the industrial Northeast and the progressive West. When the votes are counted, the bull moose has triumphed again. Something else has happened too, something that reshapes American politics for a generation. The Progressive Party has absorbed enough moderate Republicans to become a permanent force. The old GOP, reduced to its conservative rump, begins its long decline. America enters 1917 with a three-party system and a president who believes his nation's destiny lies far beyond its shores. The consequences of this transformation would reverberate for decades. On January 31, 1917, Germany announces the resumption of unrestricted submarine warfare. 3 weeks later, British intelligence delivers the Zimmermann telegram to Washington. Roosevelt reads the decoded message with cold fury. Germany has proposed that Mexico attack the United States, promising the return of Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona in exchange. The calculation is cynical and clear. Berlin believes America cannot mobilize before Germany wins in Europe. They have miscalculated. Roosevelt addresses Congress on February 3, requesting a declaration of war. He does not wait the traditional months for deliberation. The world must be made safe, he thunders, and America must make it so. Congress votes within 48 hours. Because of the National Defense Act, because of 2 years of preparedness, the American Expeditionary Force begins deployment by May. 300,000 men, trained, equipped, and organized, begin crossing the Atlantic months ahead of what occurred in our timeline. General John Pershing, commanding this force, insists his troops fight as a distinct American army rather than as replacements for depleted French and British units. Roosevelt supports him completely. The weight of American industry and American manpower begins to tell. Germany's gamble has failed. The armistice comes on September 11, 1918, 2 months earlier than in our timeline. Roosevelt sails for Paris aboard the USS George Washington, becoming the first sitting American president to visit Europe. He arrives at Versailles not as an observer but as a principal, his moral authority amplified by the earlier American intervention that shortened the slaughter. The negotiations prove brutal. Roosevelt shares Wilson's instinct for a League of Nations, but not his idealism. He forces modifications that his predecessor never could have achieved, explicit reservations protecting American sovereignty, limitations on the League's authority to commit American troops without congressional approval, and a great power veto that gives the United States effective control over collective action. The treaty passes the Senate 64-24. America joins the League of Nations, a different league, shaped by Rooseveltian pragmatism rather than Wilsonian vision. Whether this compromise produces a more durable peace or merely postpones the next catastrophe remains, in 1919, unknowable. Roosevelt returns home exhausted, his health broken by decades of relentless activity. He has remade American politics, American labor relations, and America's place in the world. He has also left a legacy of interventionism that future presidents will cite to justify adventures he might never have endorsed. History remembers the bullet that didn't kill him. It forgets, as history often does, that survival is never the end of the story. It is only ever the beginning.